getting on to my second favorite point of this whole video, the religion. So we really don't know a whole lot about what the religion was like in the Bronze Age. What were the rituals? What were the gods? What were their beliefs? Were they worshipping Thor and Odin like they did in the Viking Age? Probably something, but it would have been a very early form of those gods. We just can't say for sure. We don't know. But some clues can point us in the right direction, and we can probably say that the Bronze Age Nordic religion was a much more pure and original form of the religion that was practiced in the Viking Age, and they had a much better understanding of it 2,000 years before, like I keep saying. One thing that we are quite sure of is that there was some form of sun worship. Many finds indicate a strong sun-worshipping cult in the Nordic Bronze Age, and various animals have been associated with the sun's movement across the sky, like horses and chariots, birds, snakes, and marine creatures. And this is the same for other cultures in their Bronze Age too. Strong emphasis on the sun and sun worship. In the Viking Age, the Norse religion, we do have the goddess Sol, which is the personification of the sun. It doesn't seem to be as important in the Viking Age as it was in the Bronze Age. But the god Baldur is actually heavily involved in all this somehow too, so you can see my video on that. Also, a female or Mother Earth goddess is believed to have been widely worshipped in the Bronze Age. There have been several finds of fertility symbols. We think this may be referring to the goddess Nidthus or Jud, Thor's mother. This source calling this mother goddess Nidthus comes from about 600 years after the end of the Bronze Age in Tacitus Germania. But every Bronze Age culture pretty much, and before in the world, even before that, had some kind of central mother goddess or Mother Earth or universe goddess. So it's fair to assume that they also had one in the Nordic Bronze Age. There's also definitely some sky god worship going on who could have been a very early version of Tyr, but we just can't be sure about that. I'll stop there about the god because there is lots more we can theorize about all that and the gods that were worshipped. I would recommend some other channels I really like. Craigenford, he speaks about that a lot. But just be aware the Nordic Bronze Age gods are all reconstructed basically, and we really can't say for sure. I just want everyone to know that Bronze Age religions were much more nature aligned and animism based. The gods and deities were very clearly personified things and forces in nature, and this goes for every religion in the world if we go back far enough. I always say this, and on this channel, the Norse gods of the Viking Age are symbolic. The Norse in the Viking Age may have largely lost this understanding of the symbolism of their gods by that time, but Bronze Age was the purest form of this religion with the best understanding of it. As for things like the rituals, the religious rituals that they practice, we can say a little bit. Of course, we have the rock art from the Bronze Age here. We see some examples of something looking like sun worship or celebration or festivities, especially surrounding these bronze lures, as it appears to be on the rock art, blowing these horns. The bronze lures are also the most common instrument found in the archaeology, especially in the region of Denmark and western Sweden. Bronze lures were found all over the place, and these are believed to have been used ceremonial, not just for musical entertainment, but for spiritual purposes. Long story short, the frequencies and the sounds emitted from these bronze lures and other similar instruments from other cultures around the world, like didgeridoos is another one, it creates some changes in the brain and brain activity. We know this today, this has been proven, but from ancient humans, it seems like these frequencies and sounds also actually awakened or brought to the area some sort of spiritual entities. long story again for another video. We also have evidence of rituals, being these horn helmets that were found. Again, these would have not been very convenient to use in battle, so we think they were used in ritual, and there are definitely some spiritual ritual uses for those. That one I did do a video about that, so you can check it out. So those are just a few of the things unique to this Nordic Bronze Age. But we can always compare and contrast, certain cultures and their religions, and cultures with religions that they all did at that time. One very cool example of this is something called hieros gamos rites, which are basically like sacred marriage rituals that the king or chieftain would get together with the princess or the May Queen or whatever, and they would participate in these mock marriage rituals at certain times of year, certain high festivals, and they would actually imitate their gods in the myths in order to influence some sort of fertility or effect that would come out of nature to influence the harvest or just fertility in general. We have some very clear records of the Greeks and the Romans doing exactly this, and there are parallels to this in the Norse myths, so we are pretty sure that this type of thing was done in the Bronze Age north of Europe too. Those kinds of things we can conclude just basically comparing the Nordic Bronze Age to other cultures that we know of the time. There are a ton of things, like I said, that we can theorize, and I will do this because this is my favorite part. I'll make a whole other video about Bronze Age religion and ritual. But for now, let's talk about another part of the religion, the burials, because that's something we can definitely be sure about. 50,000, or more than 50,000 burials were constructed between 1500 BC and 1150 BC in Denmark alone. This is where they have gone out and done the most digging and exploring. This is even more burials than the Viking Age, so this reflects a much more conscious effort towards funerals and burying the dead, according to their traditional customs. The reason for the burial mounds is also a subject for an hour-long video, but for now, just know that there are very specific reasons spiritually that burial mounds were created, possibly relating to the belief in reincarnation, which we are very sure that they had at the time, as did the Greeks and the Celts and everywhere else in the world, especially Indo-European culture, if we go back far enough in time. Another one reflecting this are these bog burials. For a long time, these burials in the boglands, the swamps, the ponds, the streams, and lakes, they were thought by the historians to be holy places for sacrifices, and artifacts that have been found in such locations from the Bronze Age were basically sacrifices to the gods. However, more modern research and academic theory has led many people to believe that these bog burials were actually done to criminals to prevent them from passing on to the next life. The most wicked members of society, for example, would be drowned and put in there because the body never decomposes in a swamp, and it would therefore never be able to pass on to the next life. Just like Tacitus' account also may suggest when he wrote about the bog burials there. So I think for sure that is a much more likely explanation for the bog burials. But then we also have another very curious burial, the Bronze Age stone ship burials. Some are actual ships, and some are just marked by stones in the shape of a ship. These we might equate to the Viking Age funeral, for example, of lighting a ship on fire. We light the ship on fire and send it out to sea so that our most beloved and honorable heroes may pass on to the next life and even Valhalla. At least pass on quicker than they would have done otherwise. By being in this ship sent out, it kind of mocks a quicker journey through the afterlife, kind of like the opposite to bog burials, who were drowned and never decompose, so they do not pass on to the next life. Another burial We can speak about the King's Grave of Seddon, found in northern Germany from the 9th century BC in the Bronze Age, and it's been described as a Homeric burial due to its similarity from the elite burials in ancient Greece and Italy from the same time, again, reflecting a big similarity to Greek and Roman practice of the same time or earlier. The cultures really were not that different, as I keep saying. You can also take a look at the stone slabs here from this burial. This is some deep symbolism and ritual going on here and relating to life and death and rebirth, but this is too long to go into here. These are just theories at the end of the day. I'll do another video on that. The point I'm making, though, is that Bronze Age funeral practices indicate a deep understanding and belief that they could somehow influence the process of death, afterlife, and rebirth. Now we are going to get on to my favorite part, because the Nordic Bronze Age, it was so developed, right, and creative and spiritual. What does that mean? Does that mean there are a bunch of pussies running around all painting and creating art? Or was it a bunch of hippies sitting around in circles, hugging trees and being all spiritual? Or was it a bunch of scrawny nerds just all over the place inventing new technology and tinkering on things? No. Absolutely not. All those things they definitely did, but the number one trait of Bronze Age culture, in my opinion, was their war spirit and their strength. This is my favorite part, and we have plenty of evidence for this. More than 70% of burials dating to the Nordic Bronze Age contain metal objects and weapons of various kinds, the most common being swords and daggers, but also spears and axes and shields. A large portion of all the rock art depicts warriors and warships with groups of armed men. Finds also such as the Hjortspring boats that I'm filming in this museum here, among other boats, suggest that it was a culture of strong naval warfare. And these are the only ships we have found preserved for a few thousand years, but chances are they had much bigger and more developed ships than these. Also things like spears and axes and some of the most common things found in graves. Similar numbers to other well-known warring nations like ancient Greece, for example. Guys, I would even go as far as to compare the people of the Nordic Bronze Age to Sparta. And the Battle of Thermopylae would have been this one. Archaeologists call it the Tollensee Valley Battle. Ancient DNA and archaeological evidence indicates that the people from the Nordic Bronze Age sphere were involved in the conflict at the Tollensee Valley Battle, which was in northern Germany in 13th century BC. And this was the largest excavated and archaeologically verifiable battle sites of this age in the whole world. The biggest battle that was fought from that time period, not just the north of Europe, but the whole world. So officially, our ancestors, more than 3,000 years ago, apparently fought the biggest battle in the world with thousands dead, and they think it was an incredibly massive force for the time. And remember, the Nordic Bronze Age was not big cities. This wasn't a big civilization. We were small tribes of maybe 50 to 100 people. So these tribes would have all gotten together, united, and fought together for a common cause, maybe fending off an invasion from the south. It's impossible to say what this battle was about. We just don't know. But in my opinion, this is our equivalent battle to the 300 Spartans against the Persians. Yes, the Nordic Bronze Age was very advanced and democratic and great with art and technology and a flourishing economy, but first and foremost, they were an elite warrior culture. Okay, yeah, maybe I'm being a little bit biased, but guys, it's not just me being biased about the archaeological evidence. We have, throughout history, dozens and dozens of sources from when the first historians started to record their contact with the Germanic tribes about 2,000 years ago, when they were giving the Romans hell, to the cartographers of the migration period a few hundred years after that, to the foreign sources writing about the Vikings 1,000 years ago, all the way up until 100 years ago. We have countless authors from all over the world and other cultures writing about what a beastly, warlike people that the people in the north of Europe have been. This is for more than 2,000 years. So yeah, I think the Bronze Age would have been even more so. This was our peak, like highest elite warrior culture. We of course don't have any written evidence from the time, but all the archaeological evidence and the science points to the Nordic Bronze Age having the war spirit to match with the best, like the Spartans, for example. However, also, like the Spartans were too, the Bronze Age people of the north of Europe did not use their violence unnecessarily. I'm reading from a book here that I will quote, and I'll source this below along with a couple other great books about the Bronze Age. Despite the importance of weapons in their society, archaeological discoveries suggest that intrasocietal violence was not particularly common in the Nordic Bronze Age, especially not when compared to contemporary European Bronze Age cultures. The people of the Nordic Bronze Age seem to instead have been directing their military efforts outwards, likely against people of neighboring cultures, and are believed to have participated in battles along the Amber Road and other trade routes that were important to the continuous prosperity of their society. So what that archaeological evidence and what that excerpt is basically saying is referring to the fact that we find very little evidence of violence and wounds among those back home in Scandinavia or the north of Europe, and almost no violent wounds or signs of violence against women, children, elderly, or any of those believed to be citizens. So the violence, even though we were one of the most warlike cultures to ever exist, the violence was not practiced among their own people or against their own people, not even rival tribes. This is the highest and best war spirit and battle culture. This things that were directed outwards and for the defense of their home, not amongst each other like other war cultures in different parts of the world in different times have done. That's at least what the archaeological evidence suggests. But of course, that's open for interpretation. I already told you my thoughts on that. I think they're like the Spartans. It was the most elite war culture of the time, but their war spirit was only used when necessary for things like defense and maybe going to attack some people who fucked with us a long time ago or whatever. But under no circumstances was it used against their own people. I wish to God, I literally pray to the gods every day that the people of the north of Europe can reclaim some of this war spirit. I think pretty much every problem that we face in the north of Europe today can be solved with a little ancient war spirit, but not just war spirit. We're talking about the Bronze Age Nordic war spirit. It's not about being aggressive and violent. The true divine power in this war spirit is just about standing up for yourself when someone's fucking with you. It's being peaceful and taking care of your tribe and being loving and taking care of your family and your people and bringing hell to any larger powers who come in and try to threaten that peaceful lifestyle. And I'm not talking about what you think I'm talking about. This has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with immigration or different cultures. Different cultures are not our enemies. As I have shown, trade and cooperation with other cultures has always been a great part of Nordic history, from the Bronze Age to the Viking Age and all the way up until today. The north of Europe is very interested in trade and cooperation and interested in other cultures. We have respect for other cultures and we make friends with anyone who wants to be friends. But ideally, we should defend ourselves against the ones who wish us harm, and the real enemies today they're much more hidden than that, than open cultural contact like that. But that's a subject to speak about in another video. But I hope you enjoyed the climate, the diet, the trade, the technology, the art, the religion, the prosperity, and the society setup, and of course the war spirit makes the Nordic Bronze Age the perfect time to be alive. In my opinion, that is. But what about you guys? What do you think? How do you like it out of what I've told you? Any other times and places in history that you think would have been great to live in? All over the world there has been golden ages and flourishing of certain cultures and societies. And at the end of the day, we're not all that different. We just go through these flourishing periods at different times. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's how it is. So let us know, where are your people from? Any golden ages for your ancestors? That's all for this video and this series. But there will be lots more to come. I will go into deeper detail on some of these topics in longer videos. So that's all for today. Vi ses nästa gång.